Welcome back, everyone. In these next few lessons, we're going to discuss data types in Python. Now, I've split this into two parts. Okay, the first one being the basics, the kind of fundamental building blocks that you need to understand about data types, and a more detailed look at some of the structures that allow you to hold and manipulate data. Each data type serves a distinct purpose and has specific operations associated with that data type. And each one gives a different flexibility in the way we store and manipulate data and interact with it in our coding. So let's jump into some code, because the best way to learn obviously is to actually practice. Right, let's get into looking at the basic data types in Python. We're going to kick off with the floating point numbers. Now, floating point numbers are basically numbers with a decimal point in them. Now you can have positive or negative with Python floats. And essentially, if we did A there, you'll see 3.14 comes out. You could change that to a negative, and you got a minus 3.14, okay? And if we printed the type, then we're going to get float come back, okay? To confirm that it is indeed a float data type. Now, if we change that to just 3, we run that. Again, it comes out of the float because we've used a decimal point. And we could do and run that. And again, we get the float because it sees a decimal point and it says, right, this must be a floating point number. Now you can also use underscores to make your floating point number more readable. So you could do something like this, b equals and it will still print it as the actual number that you want, but it will represent it in a much more readable form. And again, that again is seen as a float. So floating point number is very simple. If there's a decimal point in there, Python will recognize it as a float. The next one I'll look at very quickly is integers. Straightforward, obviously. If you've got a equals 3 and you print the type of that, you're going to get an integer this time because there's no decimal point in there. That's integers. Now you could convert a literal to an integer if you wanted to. So for example, if you had a equals 3 and you did the type of that, you know that you're going to get a string, okay? Because it's inside quotes. But if you did something like this, b equals integer of a, and then printed b, and then also the type of b, what's happened there is that even though a started off as a string, b applied this function int to a, turned it into a integer. And we printed that, and then we can look at the type of b, and it is indeed an integer now, even though it initially started off as which was a string. So you can apply this function there to turn a string value. So if you've got a file with data coming in and it's in a string format, you can actually apply a function to change that into an integer if you need to do calculations against it. Similarly, you could actually do float as well. Now, if you did float and run that, you see that what b is doing is turning a, which was a 3 as a string, into 3.0, which is a float number. So it applies the decimal point to the 3 to make it that float. I want to cover string, okay? So let's take, for example, Okay, so we've got, says the red car bumped the back of the blue car. Okay, this is our claims detail variable, and that's what we've assigned to it. If I did print claim detail, and around that, I get the output there now. So I've used single quotes there, but we can also use double quotes as well, and we get the same output out. Okay. Now, one thing that Python allows is to have multi-line. To do multi-line, what you need to do is use triple quotes. Okay. Triple sets of double quotes. So if you do this, you can then just do and we ran that, we now get the output from multiple lines. Okay, you wouldn't be able to do that if you just did double quotes on its own. So if I return that as double quote, right, you're going to get problems. You can see already PyCharm is complaining about the way we've organized that. I'll run that for you just to show. Okay, so you're going to get a problem there. There's one other thing you need to be aware of, is that sometimes in sentences we use a single quote. Okay, so if you were going to use something like this, where you've got an apostrophe showing possession, okay, and you ran that, it works because we use double quotes. But if you used to use a single quote, there's a problem there, because Python thinks that's where your sentence is finished. And what the heck is all this? So you need to use double quotes when you're going to use an apostrophe in a sentence. Okay. That will work just fine. And of course, if you've got multiple lines, you're using triple sets of double quotes, then you won't have a problem with an apostrophe. So if you did this, you put triple sets of double quotes, and you've got an apostrophe in there, and you ran that, then you're fine. Triple sets of double quotes protect you in a way. You can do virtually whatever you want inside this area, because you're not going to use three sets of double quotes inside your sentence. You could even put a double quote around the trunk, and it will print it just fine. Now, there is an interesting way of doing this without having to use three sets of those double quotes as well, or even using double quotes if you've got an apostrophe. So if you had this sentence where you've got the car's trunk, and we wanted to put an apostrophe in there, if you put a escape character there and ran that, it will indeed interpret that as a apostrophe, because you've told it the following character is not the end of the sentence, it's actually an apostrophe that we want to use within this string. Similarly, we could do apply the double quote there as well, and we'd get the output that we wanted. Now, there's another characteristic of strings that you really ought to understand at this point, and that's the idea of indexing. Indexing allows you to bring out particular characters or sets of characters from within the string. Let me demonstrate. So if we have this string, we'll just call it my string, and we want to find any particular character in that string, we can bring that out by referencing the index. Now, the index is basically a pointer to a particular character in that string. So if I do something like this, 0, okay, so I'm bringing out the character 0 from my string. Now remember, indexing starts at 0 and moves up in Python. So 0 is the first character. And if I run that, I get the letter F, which is the first character in that string. Now I can go further by saying, okay, I want to bring out the first, say, 3 characters. So you do 0 to 0, 1, 2, okay? So if I did 0 to 2, let's see what happens. Now we only get the first and the second character. Why is it that we don't get characters 0, 1, and 2? Now why is it that we only get the first 2 characters out when we've specified 0 all the way up to 2? It's because when you use this notation in Python, the second number is actually 1 greater than the one that you want to bring out. So it's only going to bring out 0 and 1. So if we wanted to bring out the first 3 characters there, what we actually need to do is go up 0, 1, 2, 3, position 3, and that's 1 greater than we want to bring out. So this will bring out characters in position 0, 1, and 2. So if we run this now, you'll see FIN is brought out, which is what we wanted. Now if we left the 0 out altogether, then Python just assumes that you're going from 0, and it will give us the same result. Now we can also go from the end back towards the front. So we could do -1 is the last character, which is the character R. And we can apply the same principle if we're moving backwards. So if you wanted to go from, say, if we wanted to bring back E and R, we'd say we're starting at position -2 and going towards the end. And now we're getting E and R back. And if you wanted to put -1 there, we would go from -2, not all the way to the end, but 1 character before, which would give us the E again. Now I know it can take some time to get your head around the way it works, but just practice. Practice makes perfect, as they say, and that is so true with coding. The more you try things, the more you'll become aware of how it all works. So we're going to move on to Boolean now. Okay, so Boolean is just basically true or false. Okay, true with a capital T or false with a capital F. Okay, and that's just to signify whether something is true or false in your logic. And the data type for that is bool. So let me just demonstrate that. Right, so you get a bool when you try to do a type of true or whether you use false. So how do we find this useful? Because when we're trying to do logic within our code and we want to see whether something is actually correct or incorrect or true or false, we use Boolean for that. So if I do A equals 1, B equals 2, and I say my bool equals A is greater than 2. Now, we know that A is not greater than 2, okay? If we print that, we're going to get the false, okay? And if I did print the type of my bool, I get a Boolean. So my bool is evaluating to false in this case because A is not greater than 2. And as you get into more complex coding, you'll see the value of using true or false in your logic. So that's a quick run through of the very basic data types in Python. We're now going to go into a bit more complexity by going through some items in a bit more detail.